At long last, Pokémon has finally come to the Switch, and its first mainline games on a home console are certainly not what anyone expected. Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee are taking a sharp right turn in a different direction than their predecessors, combining elements of past entries, and I do mean past entries, with some from Pokémon Go of all places, and it's creating a lot of mixed opinions across the interwebs. I'm sure you, the viewer, have seen a fair share of it, and maybe even contributed. And with a major game reveal this unusual comes a lot of hot takes. People are trying to decide whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. But I don't think it's quite that simple. This is a complicated topic with a lot of nuances to it. And so I want to do this, let's be honest, too late to call a hot take, a bit differently. We're going to approach this more analytically and judge all the little moving parts surrounding the new reveal individually, and hopefully end up with something more substantial than the hundreds of clickbait reactions that are probably crowding your recommended column as we speak. So now, let's take a look at the good and bad of Pokémon Let's Go. First off, despite being geared more toward casual fans, the debut trailer still made veteran trainers sit up and take notice, through showing a few things that a lot of fans have been clamoring for. Seriously, how long have people been wanting Followermons to come back now ever since it was a thing in Heart Gold and Soul Silver? And the trailer showed it front and center. For all those times you wish random encounters weren't a thing after running out of repels in the depths of a Zubat-infested cave. Well, Let's Go is making wild encounters visible on the map now so you have a chance to avoid them or chase down the one you want, and some of them are even non-aggressive. Or how about being able to ride on the backs of your own party members if they're big enough to carry you? Or even multiple save files. Well, one per account, but still. As much of a departure as Let's Go looks to be, as much as it seems to be more casually oriented, this first glimpse alone shows us the devs are making decisions with more dedicated fans in mind as well. It's a reassuring start. That said, on the opposite end, one potential issue is something they're digging their heels in with and keeping the same. Even though it is a return to the Kanto region, limiting players to just the first 151 Pokemon feels like a misstep. And not for the reasons you'd immediately think. Thing is, OG Kanto kinda has really shaky type distribution. Sure, when we were all school kids we didn't notice, but there's a severe lack of Ice, Ghost, Dark, Dragon, Steel, and Fairy types within that first 151, on top of very few competent bug types, and approximately 40% of the mons native to the region are either part water or part poison. Needless to say, it makes building a balanced team difficult. The silver lining here is apparently certain regional variants from Alola will also be obtainable somehow, which should help plug a few gaps at least, and there's still that one unknown new Pokemon they teased at the end of the trailer, but I can't help but wonder if something more could have been done. Relying so much on a dated dex could end up being a dent on players' experiences if their team choices get bottlenecked due to several types having few options. That exact problem marred Diamond and Pearl for a lot of people, if you remember, and it's poised to happen again here. Fortunately, it seems some things are changing, and it's definitely going to help Let's Go stand out better. One thing that's low-key really bugged me about past remakes/revisits of old regions is that aside from towns and a select few dungeons, the aesthetics have been mostly untouched. It's not something you really think of at first, but looking back, don't a lot of the routes in earlier gens just kind of blur together in your memory? Most routes and caves in older regions lack distinct visual identity, unless they had some kind of gimmick. And while admittedly this was mostly a result of graphical limitations back then, when past remakes had a chance to fix this, all Game Freak did was just kinda touch up the graphics and otherwise leave the details the same, and these aesthetic issues persisted. But Let's Go seems to be fixing that. Most locations we saw in the trailer had some kind of extra details that weren't present before. This kind of thing may get overlooked most of the time, but it'll help a very dated region feel more visually distinct and less reliant on being carried by its identity of being the first region. However, there's something else they could have updated that they clearly haven't, and it's another potential problem. Let's be honest, Kanto's design is rough around the edges. The overall map isn't bad per se, but many individual locations have aged poorly, a result of a dev team that had much less experience back then. And, again, graphical limitations. This happens with a lot of older games, and many remakes and other franchises take the chance to rework shakier sections using the knowledge that developers have gained in the years since the original game. We saw this recently with Metroid Samus Returns, which successfully smoothed over many of Metroid 2's design missteps and brought the experience into the modern age. From what it looks like, Let's Go isn't even attempting to do this. In fact, almost every clip we saw showed us a Kanto that is structurally identical to how it was 20 years ago, despite the upgraded aesthetics. Complete with inexplicably angular and grid-like design, just after going 2 turns in the Alola region, which looks much more organic in comparison. In fact, some of the changes from past visits to Kanto have been reverted. Viridian Forest lost the varying elevation levels it had in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, which was pretty fitting for a forest that basically grew in the middle of a mountain pass. And the one place that has apparently changed, the cycling road, is still a far cry from the high-tech bridge it was last time we saw it. Now that's not a red flag on its own, but it further emphasizes the intent behind Let's Go, to appeal to casual fans, or those who lost interest after the first couple generations, by recapturing a snapshot of their memories from back in the day. But this itself is the biggest potential issue these games face. Remembering the past has its place and all, but over-relying on it is often a detriment. What we're looking at here is a pair of games that seem deliberately intent on reminding its players of what once was above all else. Sure, it can feel comforting and nostalgic, but what happens once that nostalgia wears off? We've seen examples recently of games that leaned so hard on trying to imitate their distant predecessors that they felt dated immediately because they'd turned away anything gamers and developers have learned in the time since. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but why create something just to reminisce on the old when you could use what you know now to improve it and allow the result to stand on its own in addition to rekindling old memories? But then again, maybe there's a purpose for a game or games like that. Because despite these issues, Let's Go seems to have a very smart purpose in mind. The whole Pokémon fanbase has many different groups, more or less. Kind of like all the different trainer classes out there. You got fans of the franchise as a whole, people who stick to the main entries, fans of spin-offs like Mystery Dungeon, competitive trainers, TCG players, anime fans, the list goes on. But there's also been a sort of subgroup who played the earlier entries, but has kinda sat on the fence for a long time since, waiting for something that appeals to them enough to dive back in. And recently, there's another group of fans who got interested through Pokémon Go but haven't dipped their toes into the rest of the series yet. Let's Go is meant to catch the attention of both of those groups, creating a hybrid middle ground that, if all goes according to plan, will then get those groups interested in the mainline games and the rest of the series as a whole. And judging by what seems to be an overwhelmingly positive reception from those crowds, this may end up being a really good move despite what flaws the final product may have. But all of that would be for naught if it came at the cost of the current fans, right? Back when leaks for the games started spreading due to becoming more credible, there were a lot of people worrying that the series as a whole was going to start catering to the Go crowd and abandon the fan base it already had. But it turns out those fears were unfounded, because... Can I say that the way they held a press conference immediately after revealing Let's Go was a brilliant move? TPC actually learned from the fan backlash last year toward Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon not being what fans expected, and they got out ahead of the narrative and made sure people knew exactly what was going on this time. I mean, in a perfect world it wouldn't have to happen because they wouldn't have to worry about the fans jumping to conclusions, but it was still a smart move nonetheless. And in said press conference and an official announcement afterward, we got word that Let's Go is not replacing the main series, and the next mainline games will in fact be happening next year, geared more toward dedicated fans, free of influence from Pokémon Go and other such things that longtime fans had mixed feelings towards. Instead of replacing anything, Let's Go and any successors are intended to exist alongside the main series, providing a different experience in the same familiar world that can appeal to different demographics. In fact, Let's Go hasn't even delayed Gen 8's release at all. 2019 will put it right on the 3-year cycle we've been on since Gen 5 started. So, if things break right, this could end up a win-win situation, creating a new sub-series to appeal to casual players and former fans, while freeing up the main games to no longer have to shoulder that burden. Who knows what it'll be capable of then? So, when it comes down to it, we're looking at something different yet very familiar, cliché as it may sound. We still have a lot of unanswered questions about this return to where it all began, and there are potential pitfalls already, but overall there seems to be more good here than bad. Worst case scenario, Let's Go ends up being a flawed but still solid start to a secondary series that does well enough to get a sequel a few years down the road and get it better that time. As for my own thoughts, I'm not sure this one's my cup of tea. I'm going to take a wait and see approach for now and see if I get any more interested in the coming months. Hey, while you're here, make sure you check out my other content. You know Smash Bros. Is going to be a big deal going forward, and I have roster predictions, character concepts, and all kinds of things in that regard. And for the record, I don't think Let's Go will affect Smash Switch at all. I've seen some talk surrounding Eevee lately, but I think these games have come too late to be involved. It's kinda like how Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire didn't have any content in Smash 4's base release. Special thanks goes to Voyager, as usual, for knocking it out of the park on the graphical front. Thanks as well to my patrons, especially our 4 newcomers. Glad to have you on board, guys. Supporting the channel helps keep things going more smoothly on the development side of things, not to mention helping out my own sanity. And it also gets you little perks like design notes or a glimpse into future projects. And so, now we await whatever E3 holds for us. Whew, anyone got a full restore?